Our next storyteller is Tudor, and is our local incredible musician. Bob, I don't know how many instruments you play, but I know one is the piano, the concertina, and harmonica, and I'm not sure what else. Please, Bob Tudor.
That's the sound of my mother calling me when I was, well, all through my school years, including third grade. But when Sharon invited me to tell a story, it was the 1-year anniversary of my mom's death. And I knew somehow that a story about my mom would figure into it. And I started thinking what story that might be. And then I started realizing maybe it's a story about my mom not being there. And so my mom instilled in me a few things that I value greatly, and one of them is helping me right now, and that is to somehow find a sense of calm even when things are less than calm. And in fact, my mother, I think, would prefer a full-blown emergency to any sort of hysteria or drama. She was, I remember her saying, you know, I'll give you something to cry about. Really need something to cry about. I can find something. And she displayed these incredible powers of remaining calm in many tragic situations, sometimes involving herself. But she was always, she would just take control of things, even if she didn't know what the outcome would be. One time, I remember my brother was practicing out of a book called Things Every Boy Can Do, which I recommend highly. And there was this trick where you take a bucket of water and you put it up on the ceiling, and then you get a broomstick, and you need a ladder for this. And you get a broomstick and you support the bucket with the broomstick, and then you climb down and you hold that, and you take away the ladder, and you wait for some unsuspecting person to come along like your little brother, and you say, here, hold this for me. And the next thing you know, the next thing I knew, in this case, I was standing there holding a bucket of water up against the ceiling with no one to help me. My mother came in, and she would have none of this. This is just a ridiculous situation. And she just said, give me that. And she took the broom handle out of my hand, and the water came crashing down. The bucket came down, made a huge mess. And she still kept her cool. She didn't care. And throughout my whole life, there were many, many things that happened. But it occurred to me that her calling for me, that was itself very calming. And it didn't really matter, even if you knew you were about to go, you didn't know, I might be being called to my death or something. And there was something about the way she did it that she never yelled, like, get over here, you horrible kid, or anything like that. It was always very positive. And so when I grew up, was on the north end of Colorado Springs, what is now Colorado Springs. And if you can picture a horseshoe in your mind, my mom loved horses. So think of a horseshoe, and the loopy part of the horseshoe represents the creek where I played most of the time. This is something I have in common with my wife, who also grew up on a ranch, largely unsupervised, which was wonderful. That's how I grew up, was spending hours and hours and days until you would hear that, and turn around and head for the house. Well, if you can imagine this horseshoe, that's this big creek that loops around, and at the open part of the horseshoe, that would be about where our house was. There's a big balcony she could go out on, and she could call me. And she often did not call me. It would be hours and hours. I would just be out there playing, get into all kinds of trouble. And there are various spots on this horseshoe, this U shape, on the creek that I had experiences. When we first moved out onto this ranch, for instance, on one side of the U, there is a spot where there are cliffs, and there were coyote dens. And one time our dog, that was rumored to be part coyote, I'm not sure if that was really true or not, had a litter of puppies in one of these coyote dens. And so the solution to this problem, I didn't really know it was a problem, but I was sent in there to retrieve these puppies. And my sisters hoisted me up and sent me into this little tiny cave. And when I turned on the flashlight, I was staring face to face with Buff and all of her puppies right in my face. And somehow I stayed calm, and Buff could have just snapped my head off, but instead I took a puppy one at a time, and I somehow found a way to pass it across my body and out this cave to my siblings who were waiting. Now you would think that would, I don't know, I might not go into another cave, but not long after that, we had been trying to dam up the creek, and we came across a big pipe that was about, 18 inches in diameter, probably about 15 feet long. And we used that as the main kind of overflow for our dam. Well, it filled up with sand when the creek flooded one time. And so neighbor kids and I decided that we would dig all the sand out. And I felt like I must have thought I was a great spelunker or something. And in fact, I had done this, the puppy thing twice. 2 different times I've been sent into caves to retrieve puppies. So I thought, no big deal digging out a pipe full of sand. And we spent, I think it was days, just clawing away at the sand. And it took several people. There was the guy in the front digging, and we were digging from both directions. And there was a cleanup person behind you to push the sand on out after you loosened it. And as we got closer to the middle, I could start hearing sounds of someone else scratching away at the other side. And I got excited. I got very far ahead of the kid who was cleaning up behind me, and I rolled myself into this pipe. And I was just in there, and I remember having this sensation that this must be a dream, this can't be real, and I tried to stand up inside an 18-inch pipe. And I hit my head, and I started panicking, and I wasn't very calm. And I just remember the feeling of being saved at that moment when Johnny, who was digging from the other end, all of a sudden his hand, one finger broke through the sand, and all this fresh air came in through this tiny, tiny little hole. And it just was the most wonderful thing. Anyway, along this U-shape, there were many experiences like that on the creek. The creek would freeze in the winter. We would dam it up in the summer if we could. Well, one time my mom wasn't around, and it was a very cold morning, and my grandmother was taking care of me, and she was not able to walk really. She couldn't drive a car. And for some reason, all of my siblings were gone. I was the youngest by 6 years, and so they were all off doing things. And it was a school morning, and my grandmother dressed me in the clothes that my mother liked me to wear. And my mom liked to actually knit and make some of my own clothing, which I was very proud of. Later in life, I wasn't quite so enthusiastic about her sewing. And in fact, some of the things I was wearing this particular day, I came to discover lately had their certain flaws. But there was a stocking cap, this knit cap, and I'd watched her knit this, and I loved it. The colors were so cool. It had yellow and brown and gray. and blue in it, and it had a chin strap that came across with a little button. And she had also knit me matching mittens. And this was a fantastic outfit, and I was wearing my parka, which I have to say the parka was a huge disappointment, because when my parents were deciding to get me a new parka, it was announced at breakfast that Bobby needs a new parka. And we were going into town to get the parka, and we got there, and we parked the car, and we got out, and I went over, and I was so disappointed when it turned out that I wasn't getting a parking meter. I thought that I was going to get my own parking meter for some reason, and that's why we parked where we did. And instead we had to go into a store, and I had to get this clunky thing that was very difficult to wear. Anyway, picture a beautiful Colorado morning where it may have snowed just a little bit after we had some cold weather. A beautiful blue sky. I was wearing my jeans, and I guess we're all pretty much old enough here to remember when jeans were really something you had to fight with them for days to get them to move, to be flexible enough to wear. And they also had cuffs frequently that were like 6 inches high. 6-inch cuffs that were frequently full of gravel and dirt. And it was amazing when you change your jeans finally and discover all the things in your cuffs. So I had these 6-inch cuffs and these kind of immovable denim jeans and my parka and my special cap with the thing across it and my mittens. And my grandmother sent me down to the chicken house, which is in our horseshoe shape. It was to the right from the house down towards the creek. And so I went out by myself down to the chicken shed to collect the eggs. And this is, I don't know, a few hundred yards down the trail. And I got there and I opened the gate and I went in and I found the chickens had laid some eggs, but there weren't any egg cartons to put the eggs in. So I looked around trying to figure out what to do, and I decided, well, there were only about 3 eggs. And so I put them in my pocket, in my pants. So I had 1 egg in one pocket and 2 eggs in another pocket. And I closed the door on the chicken shed and I headed outside of the corral. And I looked over and I realized that the water for the chickens had all frozen. So I went over and I pushed in the ice and I broke the ice, but I got my mittens wet. Well, I didn't really think anything of that. And I went over and I went to shut the gate, which was a metal gate, with both hands. And I put both of my wet mittens on the gate and I shut it. And then I realized my hands were just frozen to the gate. And so I started wiggling around, trying to get free. And there was another feature that my mom had in her sewing, which I really was not familiar with the usefulness of this feature, but that's to have the string going through your jacket to your mittens. So I was frozen to the gate with my hands, with eggs in my pockets, and I started wiggling around trying to get out of this. Well, I broke the eggs in my pants, and I had eggs streaming down my legs, and I was discovering that my mom's, this little thing she'd knit for me, didn't really fit around my chin. It actually went right through my mouth. And in fact, later I learned to completely never button this thing. It was useless, but it was cutting and chafing my cheeks and my lips. And I struggled and struggled, and I knew my grandmother couldn't hear me. There was no chance of my mom coming out on the balcony and doing her wonderful call. I was just down there by myself. And I wriggled and wriggled and wriggled, trying to get out of there. And the school bus horn started honking for me, just to add another layer of anxiety to it. So, and now the eggs hands are starting to freeze against my jeans. And I dare say I had a problem spending the night at a friend's house when I actually wet the bed one night. And I'm not sure, I know there are a lot of theories of bedwetting and just wetting in general, but something happened while I was frozen to that fence. And it turned out I really needed to go at that time. And so now I was just so soiled beyond belief. And I remember when I finally approached the scene again later, there was my parka, which could have been a parking meter, hanging by some mittens that were still frozen to this gate. And I had managed somehow to crawl and scrape and chafe my way back up to the house where the school bus had left me behind, and the school bus driver came back in his own personal car to pick me up later. But I was completely just so, my legs were chafed for who knows how long, my lips, everything. It was a horrible experience. And it made me then, thinking of this story, made me recall just a few years later, probably, well, maybe 10 years later, another beautiful day, same kind of day, and you'd think I learned my lesson about things freezing, wearing the right clothes and that sort of thing. But I was down at the creek with a couple of my best friends, and it was morning, and we were going ice skating on Monument Creek, which few people really get to do. It's a wonderful thing. You have to really be able to skate in a lot of different conditions because it never freezes, of course, all the way across. And there's often layers of different kinds of ice, and there's snow on top of it. And we were intrepid, though. And we got down there, and we were putting on our ice skates, and we became very excited at the prospect. There was where we were putting on our skates. It was beautifully smooth patch of ice, just wonderful. And you could see water flowing underneath the ice and ice bubbles moving along. And we were so eager to go. We had just one skate on and one shoe, and we started sliding around with one shoe because there were some snow patches, and you could push off of the snowy parts and then glide across the icy parts. And we started, all three of us, doing this. We were gliding and pushing with our shoes and sometimes skating, and then we would jump over the thawed sections, and there were sometimes big sections of crystals, amazing, like 3-inch deep layers of ice crystals that you could just slice through with your ice skates and make these we would make these incredible patterns and carve out shapes, and we kind of got carried away, and we ended up going down the creek. And we all, as it turned out, had used the same foot to be our regular foot in a shoe and the same ice skate on. And we found ourselves like, a mile down the creek all of a sudden with one ice skate on and one shoe. And we had fallen in the creek so many times by that point that both our shoes and our ice skates were frozen solid, like the laces were just solid, thick globs of ice. And I guess we're all grown up enough, I can admit at this point that we had also ingested some psilocybin mushrooms early in the morning. And so it was a little bit like being frozen to the gate when I was trying to figure out what to do. And we all of a sudden discovered that, yes, it was true, it was beautiful, winding through these ice crystals and the incredible blue sky, and everything was amazing. But we were really kind of in a mess because we all had a right skate and a right shoe, and even if we had wanted to swap, well, there was no swap to be made, and we couldn't get our skates off and our shoes off either. And it took us the longest time to figure out what it all to do. There was really nothing to do. I mean, we slogged and fell and scraped our way back towards the U-shaped part of the horseshoe, and then as we were getting up there, we all of a sudden heard this "Ooh." And somehow, I hadn't even been expecting that my mother would be there that day. And these two friends of mine who are close friends, that have grown up with me, were very familiar with this routine that we just play and play and play, and there's no limits, and then all of a sudden you hear that ooh, well, you go. And so here we were, and we dutifully somehow got our skates off and breaking our shoelaces and everything, and managed to walk up to the house, where we walked in the door, and there was my mom wearing a spectacular squash blossom turquoise necklace that was as spectacular as any of the ice crystals we've been looking at, and wearing all these bright colors, and we all walked in the door, and she stayed incredibly calm, and I stayed calm, and we all sat down to lunch. And I remember my friends, who are normally very big eaters, taking 3 peas. And we all had strange looks, and we sat there at the table and somehow got through it all. And I think now I've got through my story too.